Honestly, it would be better if she didn't come home at all. My mom's voice hissed through the slightly ajar door. My sister clinged her crystal glass sharply, letting out a triumphant shriek of laughter. Snorts! Just keep up the act! Mom. Once we trick her into signing that mortgage paper to pull out cash for me, she'll deploy on her next assignment and be gone. Then this house will be ours forever. Separated by a single door, I stood frozen in the biting cold. I had arrived 30 minutes late for Thanksgiving dinner, and I had to listen to the very people I had broken my back, providing for over the last 3 years, casually plotting to steal the house I bought with my own blood, sweat, and tears. But instead of breaking down in tears, the corner of my mouth twitched into a smirk. The last shred of leniency was eradicated, replaced by the cold resolve of an army major. I pushed the door open and stepped into the glaring light. Looking at their greedy faces, now pale and contorted in terror, I calmly pulled out a chair and casually dropped exactly one decision, permanently ending their parasitic future. Before continuing, please take a moment to like and subscribe to the channel, but only if you really want to know the ending of this story, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. The sharp, triumphant clink of my sister's crystal glass kept reverberating aggressively inside my skull, effectively drowning out the howling November wind whipping across the front porch. I didn't push the heavy oak door open immediately. Instead, my bare right hand gripped the freezing brass doorknob, and I let the brutal biting metal cut deep into my skin to anchor me entirely to reality. The amber warmth radiating from the dining room window mocked my profound exhaustion, casting long, distorted shadows across the frost-covered wood. The logical explanation for my current presence on this freezing porch wasn't waiting inside that warm, hypocritical dining room. The deep, rotting root of this toxic financial entanglement was buried exactly 4 years deep. I forced my hypervigilant military mind to rewind the timeline, analytically dissecting the exact moment I had surrendered my financial autonomy and operational control to these parasites. I needed to confront the origin of my own strategic failure before I could execute a proper counteroffensive against my own blood. The brass doorknob burned cold against my palm. The crystal kept clinking in my memory, and the grave where this all started opened up beneath my feet. The biting wind faded from my consciousness, seamlessly replaced by the visceral sensory memory of a torrential downpour. 4 years ago, I stood at attention in my pristine dress blues, the freezing rain soaking entirely through the heavy wool fabric, staring blankly as my dad's heavy mahogany casket descended into the muddy earth. He was the absolute only person in this bloodline who ever demanded excellence from me, drilling into my head that relentless discipline was the highest form of self-love. His callous hands had taught me to change a tire at 12. His grayly voice had told me that nobody in this world owed me anything, and that anything I wanted, I would earn with my own 2 hands. When the military chaplain finished his final somber prayer, my mom had suddenly gripped my arm. Her manicured acrylic nails dug painfully through my thick uniform sleeve, breaking the skin underneath. She didn't seek comfort in that moment. She sought a rock-solid financial guarantee. Through her manufactured theatrical sobs, designed for the surrounding crowd, she whispered directly into my ear that I was the only one who could keep this family from sinking into total poverty. The mortgage alone was $3,000 a month, she hissed, and there was no one else to pay it. It was a calculated emotional hijacking executed flawlessly at the lowest, most vulnerable moment of my entire life. The mourners around us saw a grieving widow leaning on her soldier daughter. I felt the first claw of a parasite latching onto a fresh host. I made a silent ironclad vow over that open, muddy grave. I promised my dead dad I would step up and protect them, acting as the ultimate impenetrable shield against the harsh world. Within a month, I took the entirety of my life savings, combined it with my accumulated combat deployment hazard pay, and bought the sprawling, luxurious suburban house I was currently standing in front of. I signed those endless stacks of mortgage papers, with hands calloused, bruised, and blistered from relentless infantry training. The pen felt heavier than any weapon I had ever carried. I put my name on the deed, my social security number on the insurance, and my bank account on the direct deposit for every single monthly expense. I blindly believed that providing a secure, stable roof over their heads would heal our collective grief and buy me the unconditional love I craved. I executed my perceived duty flawlessly, treating my family like a vulnerable civilian unit that required my absolute protection. My s'mores and oh. Every dollar I poured into that house was a brick in a fortress I was building for people who were secretly sharpening their knives behind my back. I was the architect of my own financial ambush, and I didn't even know it. But the tactical goalposts kept shifting with terrifying speed. It started with me covering the basic utilities, then escalated to absorbing the weekly grocery bills, and eventually mutated into funding the lavish high society lifestyle they firmly believed they were owed. My sister needed a new wardrobe for networking. My mom needed a country club membership for her mental health. The secondary credit cards I had foolishly issued became unlimited expense accounts with zero oversight. I stupidly rationalized every drained dollar. I told myself my mom was grieving heavily, that my sister was just aggressively finding her professional footing in a competitive corporate world. I swallowed my own basic needs. Living austerely out of a canvas duffel bag on various military bases, utterly convinced that my extreme financial sacrifice was buying family unity. The monthly bank statements told a different story. Every month the withdrawals grew larger. Every month the excuses grew thinner. I was catastrophically wrong. The crystal clinked again inside of the house, a sharp ringing sound that snapped my focus violently back to the present. The ledger of my misplaced guilt was officially zeroed out. My financial blindfold burned away in the freezing air. I tightened my grip on the brass knob, my muscles coiling as I prepared to breach my own home. Before I breached that dining room to deliver my ultimatum, I needed to steady my erratic heart rate. Tactical breathing. In for 4 seconds, hold for 4, out for 4. It was the exact same survival rhythm I used when marching with an 80-pound rucksack, cutting deep into my bruised shoulders in the sweltering, suffocating heat of basic training. For 3 brutal years, while my mom and sister lounged comfortably in the air-conditioned, pristine living room, I paid for my daily reality consisted of cracked lips, bruised ribs, and the relentless screaming of drill instructors. I ran 10 miles before sunrise in boots that shredded my heels raw. I crawled through mud so thick it sucked the gloves off my hands. I slept in 4-hour shifts on a cot that smelled like mildew and old metal. I embraced the suffering, pushing my physical body to the absolute brink of total collapse because I thought the paycheck at the end of the month served a higher sacred purpose. Every drop of sweat in the dirt was supposedly a brick in the foundation of my family's security. Every bruise on my shins was a deposit into the savings account of their gratitude. Every cracked rib from a training accident was a line item on the invoice of their unconditional love, an invoice they never intended to honor. I remember one February night on a field training exercise. My boots soaked through with freezing slush, my socks so wet they squatched with every step. I hadn't slept in 36 hours. My shoulders were raw and bleeding from the rucksack straps. I called home from a borrowed satellite phone during a 5-minute break. My mom answered on the second ring. She didn't ask why I was calling at midnight. She didn't ask about the exhaustion cracking through my voice. She asked if I could transfer an extra $500 because she and my sister had been invited to a charity gala and needed new dresses. I transferred the money while standing in ankle-deep mud, the phone pressed against my frozen ear, and I told myself I was doing the right thing. The hardest part wasn't the physical pain or the grueling sleep deprivation. It was the digital glaring reminders of my ongoing exploitation. I vividly remembered sitting in the back of a canvas-covered transport truck after a grueling 3-day field exercise. I was caked in dried, itchy mud, smelling strongly of diesel fumes and stale sweat, eagerly pulling out my phone to check on my unit's logistics. Instead, the cracked screen lit up with a barrage of banking alerts. Notification: $450 at La Mer Spa. Notification: $800 at a designer boutique. Notification: $320 at a premium wine club subscription. My mom and sister were casually swiping the secondary platinum cards I foolishly provided them. blowing through my hazard pay while I sat shivering, eating a cold, tasteless meal out of a plastic pouch. The mud on my face was still wet, the diesel still burned in my nostrils, and 3 states away, my sister was getting a hot stone massage on my dime. The contrast was so obscene it should have woken me up right then. It didn't. I locked the phone, put it back in my vest, and stared at the canvas ceiling of the truck in dead silence. Every single time I attempted to question their reckless, spiraling spending, my mom deployed her tears with terrifying tactical precision. She would call me, her voice trembling dramatically over the secure line, claiming that her high society social circle was the absolute only thing keeping her severe depression at bay since my dad died. She needed the spa treatments. She needed the lunch-ons at expensive restaurants. She needed the monthly shopping trips with her friends. Without them, she said she would fall apart completely. My sister would immediately chime in, aggressively weaponizing her own incompetence, claiming she desperately needed designer clothes to network for her elusive corporate career. She had meetings, she said, important people to impress. And you can't impress important people in off-brand clothing. And like a disciplined, brainwashed soldier following a flawed operational order, I fell for the ambush every single time. I paid the exorbitant credit card bills without a word. I stayed completely quiet. I let them bleed my accounts dry, to avoid the agonizing guilt trips that would follow any attempt at resistance. I let out a long, slow exhale on the porch, watching my breath plume into a white cloud in the freezing night air. The justification trap had just been blown wide open by their treacherous laughter echoing through the door behind me. They didn't view me as a loving daughter or a supportive sister. To them, I was just a faceless, high-yield ATM stuffed into a combat uniform, existing solely to fund their delusions of grandeur. The military had trained me extensively to identify, isolate, and neutralize threats to my unit's survival with extreme prejudice. It was time to aggressively apply that exact same ruthless doctrine to my own personal life. The most dangerous enemy wasn't located in a combat zone overseas. They were sitting right at my dining room table, drinking expensive wine I paid for, wearing pearls I bought under a chandelier I financed. I squared my shoulders, shifting my posture from civilian sister to commanding officer. The softness drained from my face. My jaw locked. My spine straightened. I ran through the tactical inventory in my head. My name was on the deed. My name was on the mortgage. My name was on the insurance policy. My name was on every single credit card they had been swiping for 3 years. I had the legal authority, the financial documentation, and the iron will to shut down their entire operation in a matter of hours. They had treated me like a limitless resource, an oil well that would never run dry. They were about to discover that the well had just been capped with reinforced steel. The campaign had officially begun. My mind flashed to a harsh, deeply grounding conversation I had with my older brother just a month ago. He had served 2 grueling combat tours before transitioning into a civilian engineer role. He was a man carved from the exact same stubborn, uncompromising rock as our dad. We were sitting on the rusted, dented tailgate of his beat-up pickup truck just outside the garrison gates, drinking bitter black coffee out of cheap styrofoam cups. The morning air smelled heavily of diesel exhaust and damp pine needles. Grease stains darkened the knees of his worn jeans. His steel-toed boots were scuffed and mud-caked from a long week on a construction site. It was a simple, rugged moment, entirely devoid of the suffocating pretension, the fake smiles, and the constant underlying financial demands that coded every single interaction with our mom and sister. He didn't ask for anything. He didn't need anything. He just sat there sharing his coffee and his time, 2 things my mom and sister had never once offered me. My brother had looked directly at me, his sharp, observant eyes studying the dark, heavy circles under mine. He saw the weight I was carrying, the financial chain wrapped around my neck that was slowly choking the life out of my bank account and my sanity. He Snorts knew all about the secondary credit cards I had issued. He knew about the massive, suffocating mortgage I was carrying entirely alone. He knew about the spa charges and the boutique spending sprees because I had shown him the bank statements in a moment of frustrated weakness. He suddenly crushed his empty coffee cup in his callous hand, the sound harsh and violent in the quiet morning air. He didn't mince his words to spare my feelings. He told me flat out that I was funding a psychotic delusion. He warned me that a parasite doesn't voluntarily stop feeding until the host is completely dead, and that my mom and sister were going to aggressively strip my finances to the absolute bone if I didn't establish a hard, impenetrable defensive perimeter immediately. He pointed at the bank statements I had shown him, jabbing his thick finger at the spa charges like he was marking targets on a tactical map. He told me our dad would have been disgusted. He reminded me that our dad had worked double shifts at the factory for 30 years, and never once asked anyone for a handout. He said the women in that house had turned our father's legacy into a credit card and were maxing it out without a shred of shame. His eyes were steady. His voice didn't waver. He meant every single word. I had defended them out of pure stubborn habit, reciting the same tired, programmed excuses about grief and family duty. I told him Mom was still processing Dad's death. I told him my sister just needed a little more time to get her career off the ground. But looking back at that conversation now, standing on this freezing porch with their scheme ringing in my ears, the contrast was sickeningly clear. Here was my brother, a man who worked brutal 60-hour weeks in heavy steel-toed boots, who drove a truck with 200,000 meters on the odometer, who packed his own lunches in a beat-up cooler, and never once asked me for a single dime or a co-signed loan. He called just to check on my mental health. He actually cared if I was getting enough sleep between combat drills. He sent me care packages with beef jerky and instant coffee, the cheap kind, because he bought it with his own money. Meanwhile, my mom only initiated contact when the platinum credit limit was nearing its maximum cap. Brotherhood wasn't defined by shared DNA or a common last name. It was defined by who willingly stood in the trenches with you when everything else fell apart. My brother's blunt, uncompromising words had planted a massive seed of doubt in my mind, an acute, tactical awareness that had grown steadily over the past few weeks, like a crack spreading through a dam. It was his deep, growly voice echoing in my head that ultimately prompted me to take emergency leave this Thanksgiving. I desperately wanted to come home and see the reality of this situation for myself, without the deceptive, sugar-coated filter of their carefully curated phone calls, without the manufactured excuses and the rehearsed guilt trips that always ended with me authorizing another charge. I wanted to see if my brother was right about their parasitic, manipulative nature. I wanted to sit across from them at that dinner table and look into their eyes and see if there was anything left worth saving. The triumphant, scheming laughter currently ringing from the dining room just confirmed every single one of his warnings. The blindfold was completely ripped off, leaving nothing but cold, hard facts. I reached for the door handle, ready to initiate the final confrontation. The actual catalyst for my unannounced arrival had happened just 3 days ago. I was sitting at my steel desk in my sterile office, on base reviewing logistical reports, under the harsh fluorescent lights when my sister called. She didn't bother to ask how my day was, or if I was safe. She didn't ask about my unit, or my upcoming assignment. She immediately launched into a manic, breathless pitch about her fabricated public relations startup. She claimed she had identified a gap in the market, that she had potential clients lined up, that she desperately needed massive capital to launch. Without a hint of hesitation or shame, she aggressively demanded that I co-sign a massive commercial loan against the equity of the house, my house, the one with my name, on every single piece of legal paperwork, so she could lease a premium glass-walled office space downtown. She framed it not as a favor but as my inherent duty to fund her dreams. When I hesitated firmly, citing the extreme financial risks and my own impending deployment, her tone instantly shifted from sickly sweet to highly venomous, treating my logical caution as a personal attack on her God-given right to my money. Within seconds of my hesitation, my mom had physically confiscated the phone from my sister. I could hear the fumbled handoff, the frustrated hissing between them, as they coordinated the next phase of their attack. My mom's voice dripped with weaponized theatrical disappointment, designed to inflict maximum guilt. She accused me of being horribly selfish, of maliciously holding my sister back out of petty jealousy over her civilian freedom. She told me I was a major making excellent money living for free, on a military base with no real expenses, and that my refusal to risk my hard-earned home equity was a disgusting betrayal of my dad's memory. She invoked his name like a weapon, using a dead man's legacy as a crowbar to pry open my bank account. It was a textbook psychological ambush, a coordinated 2% attack they had perfected over 3 years of constant practice. They used my deeply ingrained sense of duty as a bludgeon to aggressively beat me into submission. I ended the call without giving them a definitive answer. My jaw clenched so tight my teeth, a dull, throbbing pain radiating up through my temples. The silence in my office was suddenly deafening. That night, instead of reviewing deployment logistics or resting for morning PT, I opened my personal laptop and booked a commercial flight. I desperately needed to look them directly in the eye. I needed to witness this supposedly thriving family dynamic I was allegedly destroying with my reasonable financial boundaries. I needed to test my brother's theory against the reality of Thanksgiving dinner. I rapidly packed my canvas duffel bag with 3 days of civilian clothes and my military ID. I skipped the parade of hollow holiday greetings on base, avoided the dining hall where other soldiers were calling their families, and took a taxi straight from the airport to the suburban house. The cab ride from the terminal was 45 minutes of silence, my reflection staring back at me from the dark window. I rehearsed nothing. I planned no speech. I simply let the facts stack up in my mind like ammunition. 3 years of mortgage payments, $85. Zoos and drained through credit cards and cash withdrawals. 0 contributions from either of them. 0 repayments. 0 gratitude. The numbers alone were the only argument I needed. I arrived exactly 30 minutes late to the Thanksgiving dinner. I had fully expected to walk in, sit down, and demand a mature adult conversation about our financial boundaries. Instead, I stood completely still outside the front door and caught them actively planning my financial assassination. The memory dissolved instantly. Ripped away by the icy air stinging my face on the porch, the flashback was over. The physical stinging bite of the freezing brass doorknob grounded me entirely in the present moment. Every memory I had just replayed, every dollar I had bled for them, every cold meal I had eaten in a muddy-eye truck while they swiped my platinum card at the spa, all of it compressed into a single undeniable conclusion. My mom and sister truly thought I was nothing more than an ATM they could casually reprogram to dispense cash at their whim. They were scheming to steal my house, the house I had bought with combat hazard pay, earned in places they couldn't find on a map. They were about to find out, in a matter of seconds, that they were dealing with a highly trained commanding officer, whose patience had completely evaporated. I gripped the heavy brass handle, firmly twisted it with deliberate force, and pushed the heavy oak door open, stepping directly out of the shadows and into the glaring light of their fake empire. I strode into the dining room with deliberate, heavy steps, letting the front door slam shut behind me with a hollow, echoing crack that sounded like a gunshot. The blinding light from the expensive crystal chandelier, personally paid for by me, bounced sharply off the opulent, excessive Thanksgiving spread. A 20B roasted turkey glistened at the center, surrounded by polished silver serving dishes and bone-white china, none of which they had purchased. My sister was draped elegantly in a designer gown. She hadn't earned her crystal wine glass, still half raised in her frozen hand. My mom wore heavy pearls that caught the light with every nervous movement of her jaw. The exact moment my shadow fell across the pristine white tablecloth, their triumphant, scheming laughter choked violently in their throats. Their fake celebratory smiles froze instantly, cracking like cheap porcelain. I watched with clinical satisfaction as their faces drained of all color, replacing their arrogant smirks with expressions of sheer unadulterated terror as they realized I had heard everything. I didn't yell. I didn't break down crying or demand an apology. With the absolute terrifying composure of a military commander inspecting a completely failed platoon, I walked purposefully to the head of the table, pulled out the heavy mahogany chair with a sharp scrape against the hardwood floor, and sat down. The silence in the room was so thick, and heavy it was physically suffocating. My sister's crystal glass trembled in her grip. My mom's knuckles went white around her napkin. I slowly reached for the crystal water pitcher and poured myself a glass, letting the splashing water fill the agonizing void. Every second of silence was a calculated weapon, designed to let them marinate in their own guilt. The turkey was getting cold. The gravy was congealing in the silver boat. The candles flickered between us, casting long shadows across the tablecloth like prison bars. My sister's hand slowly lowered the crystal glass to this table, the wine inside trembling visibly. My mom's mouth opened and closed twice before a sound came out. I looked dead into their panicked, darting eyes. "Hello, Mom. Hello, sister. It seems I missed quite an interesting toast," I said, my voice low, steady, and dangerously calm. My mom stammered pathetically, her hands shaking violently as she gripped her napkin like a lifeline. "Sarah, when did you get back? We were just joking around." I set my glass down with a sharp clink that echoed through the silent dining room. "No need to explain. Mom, I'm not here to listen to empty excuses. I just want to inform you both of some changes in this family's operational plan. Tomorrow, I'm calling a real estate agent. This house, the one in my name, will be listed for sale immediately. And starting Monday morning, all the secondary credit card accounts I've been providing you will be permanently locked. Don't even dream about any mortgage guarantee papers." The party is over. The words landed like mortar rounds. My sister abruptly dropped her silver fork, the clatter deafening against the china. The color drained from her spray-tanned face. She frantically tried to deploy her usual manipulation, leaning forward with wide, disbelieving eyes. "Sarah, please calm down. We're family. You're just exhausted from the long trip and easily triggered. You're just joking out of stress, right? I need to open my company. You can't just cut off my lifeline like this." My mom immediately clutched her chest, deploying her ultimate time-tested weapon, the one she had sharpened at my father's grave. "Oh my God, do you want to throw your own mother out on the street, Sarah? I gave birth to you, raised you. If your dad were still alive, it would break his heart to see you treat your mother and sister so cruel." The mention of my dad was a fatal miscalculation on her part. I stood up, adjusting my uniform collar with slow mechanical precision. The chair scraped behind me. My spine was iron. If Dad were still alive, he would be deeply ashamed to see you and my sister turn into lazy parasites. I fired back, my tone completely devoid of any remaining empathy. "You talk about a lifeline. For the past 3 years, my blood, sweat, and tears on the training grounds have funded your A-list restaurant dinners, your designer bags, and your expensive spa trips. That is more than enough for blind family duty. I'm sleeping at a hotel. You have from now until the house is sold to find a new place to live." The wine in their glasses settled. The candles on the table flickered from the force of the door I was about to open. I didn't wait for their hysterical tears or their begging to begin. I turned on my heel, my boots heavy on the hardwood floor, and walked straight out into the freezing night, leaving them to choke on the bitter ashes of their own greed. The heavy oak door closed behind me with a final definitive thud. If you've ever had to draw a hard, unforgiving line to protect your own sanity and finances against toxic family members, hit the like button right now. Share your experience in the comments below, because standing up to financial manipulation from your own blood takes a kind of courage that truly deserves to be recognized. The next morning, bright winter sunlight streamed into my quiet, heavily secured hotel room. I sat on the edge of the bed for a full minute, staring at my closed laptop on the small desk. There was no debate in my mind, no second guessing. The scheming laughter from the dining room was still echoing in my skull, louder than any alarm I had ever heard in a combat zone. I opened my laptop and logged directly into my banking portal. There was absolutely no hesitation in my movements, only the clinical practice precision of executing a critical military mission. First click, I selected the joint savings account, the account built entirely by my money, which had become their personal playground. The balance stared back at me, a number that should have been much higher, if not for 3 years of unchecked spending. I transferred the massive balance entirely into a secure, heavily encrypted account under my name alone. Second click, I navigated directly to the credit card management tab. The two platinum cards assigned to my mom and sister stared back at me from the screen, currently bloated with their recent luxury Thanksgiving charges. A final feast on my dime. Third click. Lock permanently. A confirmation window popped up asking if I was sure. I was sure. I had never been more sure of anything in my military career. I confirmed without blinking. The screen refreshed. Both cards now displayed a red status bar locked. No more spa charges. No more designer boutiques. No more 1,000 restaurant tabs charged to an army major eating cold rations in a canvas-covered truck. The financial lifeblood of the parasites was instantly severed. I checked the transaction history one final time. The last charge on my sister's card was a $200 bottle of champagne, purchased the night before during the Thanksgiving dinner I had funded from 3 states away. It was the last dollar she would ever drain from me. The long overdue purge was finally complete. Just over an hour later, the thick wooden door to my hotel room shook violently under a barrage of frantic fists. The pounding was wild, desperate, arrhythmic. The sound of people who had just discovered their entire financial infrastructure had collapsed. I didn't need to check the peephole to know who had tracked my location. I took a slow breath, set down my coffee, and unlocked the deadbolt. I pulled the door open. My sister lunged forward immediately, her perfectly contoured face twisted into an ugly mask of feral rage. Her mascara was smudged. Her designer coat was unbuttoned and hanging off one shoulder. Her hair was barely combed. "Are you insane, Sarah? How dare you lock my cards? Do you know you're ruining my prime years? I need money to maintain my image, to network and open my company." She shrieked, practically spitting the words at me, flecks of saliva catching the hallway light behind her. My mom tried to aggressively force her way inside the room, her voice escalating into a grating screech that bounced off the hotel corridor walls. "You heartless daughter, are you trying to kill your mother and sister? Give us those cards back right now." I stood my ground, transforming my body into a solid wall blocking the threshold. My left hand gripped the doorframe, my right hung at my side, relaxed but ready. I looked down at them, my expression as cold and unforgiving as reinforced steel. They were completely unhinged, entirely stripped of their elegant high society facade, revealing the ugly, demanding creatures underneath. The designer masks were off. The real faces were hideous. I didn't raise my voice to match their screaming. I didn't need to. A commander never shouts louder than the chaos. She cuts through it. "I am not responsible for your prime years," I commanded my words, hitting them like calculated tactical strikes, "and your fake, flashy image will no longer be built on my blood and bones. As for you, Mom, you're perfectly healthy. Go find a job." Their screams bounced off me, utterly ineffective against a mind trained to endure combat stress. Every shriek, every insult, every guilt-laced accusation only confirmed the accuracy of my brother's diagnosis. They weren't grieving. They were withdrawing. The drug was money, and the dealer had just cut off the supply. My sister tried a new tactic. She softened her voice, forced moisture into her eyes, and told me she was sorry that she hadn't meant what she said at the dinner table. The tears were flawless. The performance was academy level. But I had watched her rehearse this exact routine 100 times over 3 years, and I knew every beat of the script. The tears were as manufactured as her startup business plan. I didn't blink. I didn't soften. I stood in that doorway like a concrete barricade and waited for her to finish her performance. I slowly extended my right hand, palm up, issuing an absolute non-negotiable order. "Now hand over the keys to my house. You no longer have the right to come and go as you please." My sister froze mid-screech, her mouth still open, her lungs still full of venom she suddenly couldn't expel. She stared at my unwavering, outstretched hand, realizing with horrifying clarity that her tears and her screaming were utterly useless against a fortress that had been fortified by years of combat training. The hallway was silent for 3 full seconds. Then, boiling with humiliated rage and realizing her total loss of power, she dug violently into her designer purse with trembling, furious fingers. She yanked out the heavy brass keys and slammed them down on the small entryway table, with a violent crack that echoed down the hotel hallway like a starting pistol. She spun around without another word and stormed away forcefully, dragging my cursing mom behind her. Their heels clacked furiously down the corridor and disappeared around the corner. I picked up the cold keys, feeling the heavy weight of them in my palm. The metal bit into my skin the same way the doorknob had the night before. The perimeter was finally fully secure. I closed the door, turned the deadbolt, and placed the confiscated keys on the nightstand beside my military ID. By noon that exact same day, Helen, my ruthlessly efficient real estate agent, had hammered a massive glaring for sale sign deep into the manicured front lawn of the house. The heavy gears of consequence were finally grinding forward with unstoppable momentum. The next afternoon, I was back inside the house, steadily taping up sturdy cardboard boxes filled with my few personal belongings. Without their constant demanding presence, the house felt cavernous, completely stripped of the expensive illusions that had filled it for 3 long years. The walls were bare where my sister's designer prints had hung. The kitchen counters were clean for the first time in months. I pulled down my sister's designer prints from the hallway wall and stacked them by the front door for her to collect. I boxed up my mom's heavy pearl collection from the master bedroom dresser. I found 3 maxed-out store credit cards hidden in the junk drawer, all opened under my address without my knowledge. I photographed each one and added the account numbers to my black leather notebook. The evidence of their parasitism was everywhere, stuffed into every drawer, hidden behind every cushion, buried in every closet. The silence was golden until my phone suddenly vibrated violently against the dusty kitchen island. The caller ID flashed my sister's name. I didn't rush. I let it ring 3 times, slowly, dusting off my hands, taking a deliberate sip of water, and mentally preparing for the inevitable explosion before I finally tapped the screen to answer. "Sarah, what the hell are you doing?" My sister screamed through the speaker, her voice vibrating with sheer, unadulterated panic. In the background, I could clearly hear the faint hum of classical music and the delicate clinking of fine silverware, the unmistakable expensive ambiance of the city's most exclusive restaurant. A waiter's shoes squeaked nervously on polished tile somewhere behind her. "I'm cleaning the house and you?" I replied, my tone flat and entirely detached from her hysteria, as if she had asked me about the weather. "I'm entertaining an important business partner, and my card was just declined by the waiter in front of everyone." "Declined. Do you understand how humiliating that is?" "You evil." The background noise shifted. I could hear the awkward, suffocating silence of her dining companion. Someone who was now learning in real time that the woman pitching them a PR partnership couldn't pay for her own lunch. A chair scraped. The waiter hovered. I let out a dry, humorless chuckle. "I understand, but let me correct you. That is not your card. That is my card, and I have the right to lock it." She whimpered in absolute horror, the sound of a con artist watching their cover story disintegrate in public. "You're ruining my business connections. How am I supposed to pay for this 1,000 meal?" I didn't blink. "Dig into your own pockets to fund your flashy lifestyle, Madam PR Director, goodbye." I hung up, effectively stranding her in her own fabricated reality. The phone screen went dark. I set it face down on the dusty counter and went back to taping boxes. The following Sunday morning brought a completely different kind of noise. The guttural, heavy rumble of a diesel engine broke the quiet suburban stillness of the street. I opened the front door to see my brother throwing his beat-up pickup truck into park at the curb. Rust spots freckled the wheel wells. The tailgate was still dented from hauling lumber. He walked slowly up the driveway, his worn steel-toed work boots crunching heavily on the gravel, with a steady, unhurried rhythm. He was completely unbothered by the dramatic, hysterical chaos that had engulfed the rest of the family over the weekend. My mom had called him a dozen times, sobbing and demanding he intervene. My sister had sent him a 5-paragraph text message, calling me a monster. He read every word. He responded to none of it. He hadn't called to lecture me. He hadn't sent a guilt-laden text message. He hadn't played mediator or peacemaker. He just showed up with his truck and his work gloves ready to help me move. He stopped and took one long look at the for sale sign planted in the grass, then looked up at me standing in the doorway. A genuine rare smile broke across his weathered, sun-beaten face, signaling a silent, powerful approval of my tactical strike against the parasites. He didn't ask a barrage of annoying probing questions or try to play the peacemaker. He snorts, stepped inside, took in the sea of half-packed cardboard boxes stacked against the bare walls, and clapped a heavy, reassuring hand on my shoulder. The weight of it settled something deep inside my chest. You did the right thing, Sarah. If Dad were alive, he would support this clean break too. You've let them use you for far too long. The words landed quietly, without fanfare, without drama, the way real truth always does. For the next several hours, we worked in perfect unspoken tandem, moving heavy oak furniture and sealing boxes with loud rips of packing tape. He carried the heaviest pieces without being asked. I organized the smaller items and labeled every box with a black marker. We sat on the bare hardwood floor when the work was done, drinking ice-cold beers, the smell of cardboard dust, and packing tape adhesive in the air. In the hollow shell of that toxic house, his solid presence proved that I hadn't lost my family. I had simply finally cut out the infection. 2 days later, on a Tuesday morning, the doorbell chimed aggressively. I opened it to find my sister standing on the porch, heavily perfumed and dressed to the nines in a tailored blazer, her lips freshly painted, gripping the hands of her 2 young children. Her perfume was so thick it hit me from 3 feet away. Before I could speak, she violently shoved a stuffed, heavy children's backpack directly toward my chest. Sarah, I have an urgent appointment today to find an office for my startup. Since you're on leave and have free time, watch the kids for me until this afternoon, she ordered. Her tone oozed with the arrogant assumption that despite the locked cards and the for sale sign, I was still her subservient safety net. But I already knew her actual schedule. She and my mom had booked a premium all-day spa package weeks ago. The startup appointment was a complete fabrication. She was weaponizing her own children using their innocent faces as the bait to chain me to babysitting duty while she soaked in a hot tub on someone else's generosity. The kids looked confused and tired. They hadn't asked to be dragged out of bed early on a Tuesday morning and used as bargaining chips in their mother's failing war against the aunt who actually loved them. My niece tugged at my pant leg and asked if I had any juice inside. My nephew just stared at his untied shoes. These children deserved so much better than to be human shields in a financial siege. I genuinely loved my niece and nephew. They were innocent, confused casualties in this escalating financial war. My niece clutched a stuffed rabbit with one hand and her mother's fingers with the other, her wide eyes darting between us. My nephew stood silently, his shoelaces untied. I knelt down, giving them both a tight, warm hug, breathing in the sweet scent of their strawberry shampoo, their small arms wrapped around my neck, and for a brief second the world was simple and clean and free of adult poison. But I absolutely refused to let them be used as emotional hostages to force my compliance. I stood back up, violently shoving the heavy backpack right back into my sister's chest, forcing her to stumble backward on the porch steps. Her heels scraped on the concrete. A soldier on leave is not obligated to be her sister's unpaid maid. If you want to go to the spa, use your own money to hire a babysitter. Don't even think about using the kids to chain me down. I didn't wait for her shocked retort. I slammed the door directly in her face, locking the deadbolt, as she began to scream in furious frustration on the porch. Her fists pounded the wood. Her children started to cry. I stood on my side of the door, fists clenched, listening to the sobs of the 2 people I was truly sorry for in this entire war. The ultimate explosive reckoning arrived on moving day. The hired crew was hauling my last heavy boxes to the idling truck parked in the driveway, when my sister's car suddenly skidded to a chaotic halt behind the moving van tires, screeching on the asphalt. Snorts, she and my mom stormed aggressively into the echoing empty house, their faces flushed red with desperate fury. Reality had finally bitten them. The house was sold. The papers were signed. The money was deposited in an account they would never touch. Their free ride was officially over. My mom instantly began wailing, putting on a highly theatrical display of agony for the confused movers who froze mid-lift with a heavy dresser suspended between them. She gripped the nearest mover's arm. You sold the house. That money needs to be split with your mother and sister. That's the family home. It's the effort of this entire family. You can't just hog it all. My sister pointed a violently shaking finger directly at my face, her voice cracking with the rage of someone watching their entire scam collapse in real time. You are a total. You're throwing your own mother and sister out on the street with empty pockets. You stole our future. I crossed my arms, channeling every single ounce of command presence I possessed. I planted my feet shoulder-width apart. My spine was a steel rod. My eyes locked onto theirs without blinking. My voice cracked like a whip. Stip the money. I bought this house with my own hands. My name is on the deed. This family hasn't contributed a single dime. Only drained my labor. You talk about effort, Mom. The effort of going to the spa and playing cards. And you say I stole your future. You destroyed your own future with your laziness, your fake image, and your financial stupidity. I am not giving you a single red cent from this sale. The moving crew will clear this place in an hour. You have 60 minutes to pack up your garbage and get out of this house immediately. If you don't, I will call the police and have you arrested for trespassing. The movers lowered the dresser slowly, their eyes wide. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. My mom's theatrical wailing choked into a strangled gasp. My sister's pointing finger dropped to her side like a dead weight. The silence lasted 5 full seconds. Then they shrank back in terror, realizing the war was utterly permanently lost, and scrambled to grab their belongings in total humiliation. I stood in the center of the empty living room, arms still crossed, watching them drag garbage bags of clothes and shoes to their car. My mom dropped a bag on the driveway, and several designer shoes spilled across the concrete. My sister screamed at her to hurry up. The movers resumed their work in uncomfortable silence, giving the 2 frantic women a wide berth. One mover caught my eye and gave me a small, discreet nod. He had seen this before, families eating their own. The 60-minute clock was ticking, and I intended to enforce every second of it. At the 53-minute mark, they peeled out of the driveway. I watched the car disappear around the corner, then turned back to the empty house. The walls were bare. The rooms echoed. The air smelled like fresh paint and cardboard dust. It was the cleanest the house had ever been. Several weeks later, I had fully relocated to a highly secure, quiet apartment complex across town, completely severed from the chaos of my past. I was sitting on my small balcony, sipping hot tea, and enjoying a profound, undisturbed silence I hadn't felt in years. The leaves on the potted plants rustled gently against the iron railing. My phone was powered off and tucked inside a drawer. My inbox was empty. For the first time in 3 years, no one was reaching into my bank account without my permission. The tea was cheap, the view was modest, and I had never felt richer in my entire life. Then the security intercom buzzed aggressively, shattering the peace. Against all logic, it was them. The camera feed showed 2 haggarded figures hunched in the lobby. I buzzed them up, morbidly, curious to see what miserable, desperate tactic they had left in their arsenal. When I opened my front door, my mom and sister stood there utterly stripped of their arrogant posture. They looked haggarded and exhausted, dark circles carved deep under their eyes. They were awkwardly holding a cheap plastic-wrapped grocery store fruit basket between them, wearing pathetic, unconvincing masks of fabricated remorse. The fruit was bruised. The plastic wrap was peeling at one corner. My sister looked around the hallway nervously, her voice dropping into a sickeningly sweet, pleading register. I hadn't heard since she wanted my car 2 years ago. "Sarah, can we come inside?" We came to apologize. She whimpered her eyes, constantly calculating my reaction, scanning the apartment behind me for what I should extract next. Her gaze lingered on the flat-screen television mounted on my wall. I leaned against the doorframe, arms folded tight across my chest, and waited. Let her talk. Let her dig her own grave. Honestly, we are struggling. We spent all our money on the new rent, and the credit cards are maxed out. Just lend me $20,000. I swear I'll pay you back. The sheer unadulterated audacity of the request was staggering. They hadn't come to apologize. They had come to open a new line of credit. They hadn't learned a single lesson from the locked cards, the sold house, the 60-minute eviction. They just wanted a massive new loan. They foolishly assumed that a cheap basket of bruised fruit could magically erase 3 years of relentless financial abuse. My mom stood behind her, nodding vigorously. her eyes red and puffy, but still calculating, still measuring, still searching for the crack in my armor. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even invite them across the threshold. I simply turned around, walked to my entryway console, and picked up a small, heavily worn black leather notebook. I had been maintaining it for months, filling every page with meticulous dated records of their spending. I walked back to the doorway and threw it hard. The notebook smacked directly into my sister's chest, forcing her to catch it with both hands, nearly dropping the pathetic fruit basket. Her painted nails scratched the leather cover. "Read it," I commanded, dropping the temperature in the hallway to sub-zero. She opened it with trembling fingers, her eyes widening in sheer horror. Every page detailed every cash withdrawal, every credit card bill, every temporary loan they had extracted from the over 3 years. Dates, amounts, descriptions. La Mer Spa, the designer boutique, the wine club, the premium restaurant tabs, the emergency cash withdrawals that were never emergencies, the co-signed rental car, the luxury bedding set, the country club initiation fee. The grand total was circled in red ink at the bottom of the final page, underlined twice. "That is the money I threw out the window to fund your laziness and luxury. $85,000, and not a single penny has ever been paid back. The Bank of Sarah is bankrupt. Take your fruit basket and go make your own money to pay off your debts." My sister flipped through the pages with shaking hands, her mouth moving silently as she read the entries. Page after page of her own spending habits documented in my tight military handwriting. The $450 spa visit, the $800 boutique trip, the $320 wine club, the $1,000 restaurant meals, the emergency cash loans that funded vacations, the co-signed rental car payments that I covered when she defaulted after 2 months. Every single dollar tracked and tallied. My mom gripped the wall for support, her face ashen. My sister tried to speak, tried to form some defense, but the numbers on those pages were louder than anything she could say. I slammed the heavy door shut. The fruit basket hit the hallway floor with a dull plastic thud. 6 months later, the bitter winter had finally melted into a warm, forgiving spring. I was packing my tactical gear for a new assignment, folding my uniforms with the sharp, creased precision that had become second nature over a decade of service. My apartment was clean, quiet, and entirely mine. No spa charges, no boutique notifications, no guilt-laden phone calls at midnight. Just my gear, my orders, and a silence I had earned. Then a soft, hesitant knock came at my door. Not a pounding, not a frantic fist, not the aggressive buzz of the intercom. A knock so gentle it almost disappeared into the silence of the hallway. I opened it to find my mom standing completely alone. There was no designer dress, no heavy makeup, no entitlement radiating from her posture like a poisonous aura. She wore a simple faded linen shirt, her face visibly weathered by the harsh reality of living within her actual means. Her hands were bare, no acrylic nails, no heavy rings, no platinum card tucked in a designer clutch. Her eyes were quiet, holding a genuine heavy sorrow I had never seen in them before, not even at my father's funeral. "Sarah, can I invite you to lunch?" "I made that soup you like?" she asked. Her voice trembling with raw honesty, she held a small dented pot wrapped in a kitchen towel. The aroma of homemade soup drifted into my apartment, the exact same recipe my dad used to make on Sunday afternoons, the one with the thick broth and the slow-cooked vegetables that filled the entire house with warmth. She had made it herself, with her own hands, with groceries she had bought with her own money. The toxic arrogance had been burned away by the severe consequences of my iron discipline. Cutting them off hadn't destroyed the family. It had purged the rot. I looked at her faded linen shirt, her bare hands, her quiet, honest eyes. The woman standing in my doorway was not the scheming matriarch who had clawed at my uniform sleeve at a funeral. She was not the theatrical actress who had clutched her chest and wielded my dead father's memory like a blunt weapon. She was smaller now, quieter, real. I saw something I hadn't seen in 4 years. I saw my mother. I offered her a small, genuine smile and stepped aside to let her in. True healing often requires the most painful boundaries. If my journey to reclaim my life and my finances inspired you, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with anyone who might be struggling with a toxic family dynamic. Have you ever had to close the bank on someone you love?